Our lead story of the day is regarding yesterday's White House press briefing, which was standing room only. There were so many reporters stuffed into this room. I've been covering these press briefings for 2 years now, and I've never seen anything like it. A lot of people are showing up to question John Kirby on all the UFOs, the UAPs, the objects, the balloons, the craft, whatever you want to call them, being shot out of the skies all across the United States. Folks, this is the most up-to-date information coming out of the White House. As always, support the show by hitting that like and subscribe button. Your help and support would be greatly appreciated. Well, John Kirby rings off a litany of answers from a litany of questions from reporters. Let's go ahead and roll it.
John, if the objects don't pose a military threat and they don't pose a threat to anybody on the ground, why shoot them down? Particularly because the military is routinely monitoring radar blips and such.
I kind of covered that in the opening statement. Two real reasons here. First, there was a very real potential risk to civilian air traffic. The one shot down on yesterday, was about 20,000 feet, and the two shot down Friday and Saturday were at about 40,000 feet. And as you know, transcontinental air traffic is roughly around 30,000 feet. It depends, of course, on weather. And so because we assessed that they weren't manned and weren't being controlled, therefore left to atmospheric conditions, the real risk to safety of flight was a problem. The second purpose, and I talked about this earlier too, was even though we had no indications that any of these three objects were surveilling, we couldn't rule that out. And so you want to err on the side of safety here in terms of protecting our national security interests, and the fact that these objects could have and likely did at some point in their path transit over potential military sites of ours or sensitive sites. So again, out of an abundance of caution for those two reasons, the president, with the recommendation of his military leaders, directed them to be taken down.
Because it's so unprecedented, should the public be hearing from the president directly on this?
We have been, I think, as transparent as we can be. I won't speak for the president's personal speaking schedule, but I mean, he has been deeply engaged in every one of these decisions. He's been kept informed, including as of this morning, on what's going on with recovery efforts, and he's very much staying on top of the issue and directing his team to make sure we are properly consulting and briefing not just members of Congress but state leaders as well. And of course, we're also doing what we can in the public sphere.
What I find interesting about this is that when you have the White House, specifically the Biden administration, saying that they're being as transparent as they can be, that means they're not being transparent at all. Remember, we saw Karine Jean-Pierre do the same type of line of narrative or messaging coming from that very same podium with the documents that were found at Joe Biden's home, in his garage next to his Corvette, in his just a litany of documents just spread out all around Joe Biden. So she's saying she's being transparent. He's saying he's being transparent, when in actuality, they're not. But the questions continue.
Wait a second, sir. Excuse me. Thank you, John.
What is the president's standard going to be going forward about when he orders an unidentified object shot down?
It comes down to one simple formulation, and that's if at the recommendation of his military leaders he believes that the safety and security of the United States, the safety and security of the American people, his prime responsibility, warrant that kind of a decision.
So it's possible we could see these shoot downs on a regular basis like we saw over the weekend?
I don't think it's useful for me to get ahead of where we are right now. The president will always side on preserving and protecting the safety and security of the American people.
You said we're not flying any surveillance balloons over China. Are we flying any other kind of surveillance craft routinely over China?
We are not flying surveillance balloons over China. I'm not aware of any other craft that we're flying over into Chinese airspace.
And then finally,
notice that he said into Chinese airspace, but we are observing and watching China from space itself. I mean, you have to listen to John Kirby here because he's being very careful on what he's saying and the type of language that he's utilizing here. And he's really not being transparent whatsoever, even though he said he is being transparent up to a certain point, which they're not. We literally don't know anything here other than the fact they shot down some sort of craft. We've gotten more information from the press than we have the actual White House that's supposed to be protecting us, of which he's saying Joe Biden's doing.
can you tell us anything more about this octagonal object? How big was it?
We're still trying to assess what that was. I'm not going get into a description. I've seen the press reports about what it looked like. I think we all need to be humble here in terms of what our ability is to positively identify stuff from fighter aircraft that are going several hundred miles an hour past, essentially, in terms of relative motion, a stationary object that was not very big. So we don't know what this exactly looked like, and again, we're still not sure exactly what the purpose of it was or who owned it, but we hope to be able to find out more once we can recover the debris from that one and from the other two as well.
I'm sorry, I just don't believe that one bit. I mean, you are really throwing our military under the bus by saying, oh, well, you know, we got to really humble ourselves. At this point, really, because I've actually seen aircraft video before, which is phenomenal video, and I didn't even see the HD version. I'm like, holy crap, you guys got footage of this type of stuff? This is nuts. This is great video. I mean, the whole aspect of him saying, oh, well, we got to humble ourselves. First of all, just the fighter pilots themselves are trained to be able to spot certain objects from like a mile away at high speeds, flying past these things and identifying them. You're not going to just shoot something out of the sky just willy-nilly. You're going to identify it somewhat. You just said that it was unmanned. How would you know that if you didn't have solid imagery on what the heck's going on with this object of which you just said was unmanned? He's going to go on and talk about, well, there's no propulsion from it. It's basically just flying through the wind. So they have all this stuff. You can't use all these descriptive things about unmanned, flying through the wind, no propulsion, you know, the shape of it or whatever it's going to be, and then say, oh, well, you know, we got to humble ourselves. We don't really know what's going on. We don't really have the great imagery. You know, it's stationary, flying, you know, 500 miles an hour, whatever it may be that they're actually flying at. It's a bunch of silliness coming from John Kirby, but the silliness will continue, of course.
Just a few minutes ago, Prime Minister Trudeau said that there's some sort of pattern to the objects over the last few days. Is that something you could elaborate on, what sort of pattern the White House has seen?
I'm not familiar with the Prime Minister's comments, so I don't know if I should take a swing at that. I would just tell you that, going back to what I said before, these objects were not being maneuvered. They did not appear to have any self-propulsion. So the likely hypothesis is that they were being moved by the prevailing winds. And maybe perhaps that's what the Prime Minister's talking about. I don't want to speak for him, but certainly as the prevailing winds, particularly at that altitude, go west to east across the North American airspace, I mean, there was a general common movement in that regard.
You spoke at the top about kind of reassessing radar given what happened with the initial balloon. Can you give us a sense? Can we expect, should we assume that this is the regular number of these objects over the United States, that they've always been there and they just haven't been looked at the same way? Or is there any reason to expect that this is more than usual that are flying over?
So two thoughts there. I mean, I think we can all get our heads around the fact that there are sometimes things floating at high altitudes for various purposes. As I said, scientific research, weather balloons, all manner of innocuous craft can be aloft at high altitudes. I don't think that that's necessarily unusual here. It's difficult for me to say exactly what you can expect going forward. One of the reasons that we think we're seeing more is because we're looking for more. As you heard General Van Herk mention last night, they have modified the filters and the gains, as we call it, of the radar capabilities to look more discreetly at high altitude, small radar cross section, and low speed objects. And so if you do that, anybody that's operated a radar will know you can set the parameters, and if you set the parameters in such a way that to look for a certain something, it's more likely that you're going to find a certain something.
Given all you,
I want to pause it there because, and we'll come back to this in just one moment because there's a follow-up question here that I think it's just the response from John Kirby is just it's an asinine statement, but it's interesting here. They talk about, well, the radar, the gain on it basically has to be adjusted so you can find these smaller objects that are going at lower speeds. But it kind of throws our military and our national security under the bus because it just shows you that we haven't been looking at this stuff for literally years. And that's why the Trump administration didn't see it. But yet we had reports that Chinese were flying these balloons all across the United States under the Trump administration, but they didn't know about it. So in the same way, the reason why we're not blowing all this stuff out of the sky in 2021 or 2022 is because we didn't know about it. So now all of a sudden, when we find this Chinese freaking 3-bus tiered thing, this balloon flying all the way across the United States because Joe Biden didn't have the balls to blow it out of the sky right when he saw it, that now we're zooming in and going, oh my God, maybe there's stuff flying across the United States that we're not aware of. Yes, you're right. But why is it taking so long to do this? Because our military is falling asleep, you guys. And this is why you should be worried, because you got China wanting to invade Taiwan. You got obviously Russia saying they want to nuke everybody and obviously invaded Ukraine. You got Iran wanting to blow us to bits and blow Israel to bits. I mean, you got all this stuff going on. We can't even protect our own airspace over here. So now we got a wake up call going, holy crap, there's stuff going on in our airspace. Now we got to start taking care of it. But then we're going to pretend like we don't know anything about the objects that were blown out of the sky. It's so silly. Of course we know the objects. I mean, we are really throwing our military under the bus here. So there's either two avenues. John Kirby's lying to us about some of this stuff, or our military just is that bad in terms of technology because we're not putting the amount of funding that we need to in it. And now we're in deep trouble here because, well, we can't even identify a freaking balloon flying across the sky anymore. Or we can't identify if it's a freaking drone. We can't identify anything because, again, that's where our military's at. I hope that's not the case. I don't actually believe that. I believe our military has great optics. I believe we have high definition cameras. We're the best fighter pilots in the world. I don't believe anything John Kirby's given me here. Some of it I do. But the majority of it I think is a bunch of hocus pocus. And I don't like him standing on the podium in front of the rest of the world going, well, we got to humble ourselves. We don't really know what the objects are, but they were unmanned and given certain details. It just, we're not spying on the Chinese either. I mean, I understand you're not going to say that on the podium, but come on. We can all read between the lines here. I don't like his messaging here. I hope you enjoyed that clip from the Bald Brad Show. If you did, make sure to hit that subscribe button so you can stay up to date on all our future content.